Good afternoon. Please welcome today's MC, Brandon Morton, Sustainability Coordinator and President of the Sustainability Management Association at North Lake College.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you all for attending AASHE San Antonio. I hope you all have had a great time, or really I hope y'all have had a great time, right? Are feeling more rejuvenated and excited to get back to your institution and implement new ideas and tactics to advance sustainability on your campus. I wanted to highlight a few sustainability components of this conference. So we had a meatless menu, right? A lot of vegan, good Texas-themed spices. Thank you to all the volunteers whose t-shirts are made with sustainable materials provided by Eco Promotional Products Incorporated, right? Reusable cups provided by Companion to divert water bottle usage and waste, right? This year's waste diversion sponsor, Max R, for providing easy-to-use waste and recycle bins throughout the venue, right? And a partnership with the Duke Carbon Offsets Initiative, the Offset Network, and Urban Offsets Incorporated that will retire enough carbon offsets to mitigate all of the estimated emissions associated with travel to and from the conference, as well as on-site energy usage. So it's great, right? Carbon neutral conference. Another year with a mobile app for the full conference details to reduce printing needs. Yeah, right, that's good, right? Yeah, clap. And then a majority of the conference being here at the Henry B. Gonzalez Convention Center, which is a LEED certified facility, and a lot more. But please keep your eyes peeled because AASHE is always looking for opportunities to improve our conference. So tomorrow there will be in your email inbox a feedback form that will help make future conferences even more sustainable. So now I would like to announce about next year's conference and introduce AASHE's Executive Director, Megan Faison.
Hey everybody, who's had a good conference? Sweet. So I have two key things that I wanted to share with you this afternoon. The first is that despite our months of planning for this conference and our staff doing an amazing job at every aspect of organizing this event, there are certain things that are outside of our control. And we learned just a few days ago that our planned closing keynote, Lisa Sorrell, the president of Paul Quinn College in Dallas, is unable to join us today. As a result of these unforeseen circumstances, we scrambled to find a great keynote in just a matter of days. Thankfully, we were able to find an incredible speaker that embodies our conference theme in the work she does on a daily basis. You'll hear more about Dr. Heather Hackman, today's speaker, in just a few minutes. I'm so grateful to her for being here on such short notice. Aside from sharing that presenter change with you, I also have some news about the 2018 AASHE Conference and Expo. Typically, during the closing ceremony of our conference, we announce where we're heading for the following year. This year's a bit different. I'll explain why, but first I wanted to provide some background. AASHE had planned to go to St. Louis and had signed a contract committing us back in the spring of 2016. Since the killing of Michael Brown in August of 2014, the city of St. Louis has been working to incorporate racial justice and equity within all aspects of their community. We saw this as a great opportunity for raising more awareness for diversity, inclusion, and equity within the broader sustainability and higher education conversation. However, the first week of August this year, the NAACP, for the first time in its history, issued a travel advisory for a single state, and that state is Missouri. This travel advisory calls for African American travelers, visitors, and Missourians to pay special attention and exercise extreme caution when traveling throughout the state, given the series of questionable, race-based incidents occurring statewide recently. In addition to the NAACP travel advisory, the governor of Missouri signed a discriminatory piece of legislation in June that lowers the standards for proving employment and housing discrimination. Aside from the NAACP calling out this backward-ass legislation and behavior, the ACLU has also affirmed the NAACP position, and so do we. This past Saturday, the AASHE Board of Directors unanimously voted to empower staff to cancel our contract in St. Louis. Though this decision has a financial impact to AASHE, roughly in the amount of $45,000, we simply cannot go to a location where our members, any members of our community, may feel threatened or unsafe. AASHE incorporates our values in everything we do, and though this decision means we don't yet have a home for our conference next year, we need to demonstrate our commitment to our values, to our community, and like this year's conference theme, that we are stronger in solidarity. With this departure, I want to acknowledge our members in St. Louis and in the larger region in Missouri, who, in addition to the challenges I've already described, have also faced budget cuts and the loss of sustainability offices and positions even just this year. We recognize that bringing our conference to Missouri could have been incredibly valuable to our members. In choosing to adhere to our values, know that we continue to support you, our members in Missouri, the individual agents of change on campuses and in organizations that are working to advance sustainability. We hope that the decision to move our conference that brings $1.2 million in revenue to a city will spur action and inspire positive change. We will be identifying a new conference location as soon as possible for next year, and we will be engaging our members in a dialogue on the process of site selection. Simply prioritizing affordability and sustainability attributes is no longer sufficient. We want to ensure that every single person in our community feels welcome and safe at AASHE. I'll ask for your patience as we work to confirm the details for next year. And during these really challenging times, know that AASHE is here to support you, all in our community, as we are stronger in solidarity. Thank you.
So thank you for the good and important news, Megan, because it is important that AASHE adheres to our values, because that's why we're all here, right? So it is now my distinct honor to welcome Dr. Heather Hackman of Hackman Consulting Group, who regularly consults on the issues of deep diversity, equity and social justice with an emphasis on the issues of racism and whiteness, gender oppression, heterosexism and homophobia, classism, and climate justice. I hope you all are as excited as I am to hear her thoughts and tools that she can equip us with on deep solidarity and how to view sustainability through a social justice lens. So without further ado, here's Dr. Hackman.
Thanks. All right. Hello. All right, here we are, snuggling up to each other in this huge room, So I will be working with the lab, so I definitely want to thank folks for inviting me to share. It has kind of been short notice, to be honest, but that's actually okay. That's okay. They asked me Tuesday, and I said, yeah, and then promptly flew to Seattle to do a little bit of work there till Friday, came here Saturday, did a couple sessions, and so I just wrote this 6 minutes ago, so we'll see how it goes. And I am really honored to be here. I'm so grateful. In the time that I've had the chance to say hello to folks and interact with folks at this conference. It's such a stellar group of people. You really are such an outstanding cadre of colleagues and champions of sustainability that I'm really honored to be here. And so thank you, thank you, thank you. And it is tricky to be a stand-in, but speaking of that change, I just want to say that I had the privilege to meet Dr. Sorrell last year when I was a keynote speaker at an event at Paul Quinn College, where he's the president. And I was struck by what a formidable, visionary, and powerful change agent he is. And he's an amazing dude. So I really hope that you can bring him back next year, because I think he's just going to rock the house for sure. But more importantly, I want to acknowledge the social justice issues present when a white person replaces a person of color as a closing speaker or any keynote speaker. And that's not out of guilt, shame, and blame. I'm not like, oh, I feel. It's not that. It's not, if you followed whatever that comment was, I don't even know what I was doing there. But it's not out of that. It's not out of that. It's really more because for 4 centuries, the voices of white people have been so central to really every conversation we've had in the United States. And so it's always dangerous to recenter that voice. And so as a result of that, I'm going to talk a lot about social justice issues and have some broad brushstroke comments. But I'm going to focus specifically, or more, if you will, on issues of race, racism, and whiteness and racial justice, just so that we can keep that commentary central. Not that Dr. Sorrell would have made race his sole commentary, but being a man of color and being a president of a historically black college, race would have been just deeply present in that space. It would have been part and parcel to his conversation. And so it feels right to make sure that I do whatever I can to make it part and parcel and central to this conversation as well. So even though I'm talking broadly about social justice issues, I'm going to focus on a little bit more of my examples on race, racism, and whiteness. In addition, I just want to give you some props for that decision. Like, that is absolutely the right decision. And what I have experienced in my short tenure of doing social justice work, I've been teaching and training around this for about 25 years. What I've experienced is a lot of hand-wringing and a lot of, oh gosh, what do we do? And just let me explain that for a second. I live in Minnesota. I didn't grow up there. I'll share that later. But I've been there for 17 years, and so I know how to do that accent. And so I see a lot of people saying, oh gosh, oh geez, about issues, but they don't actually do anything about it. And so the question is always, like, it's okay to be upset. It's okay to be moved. It's okay to be like, wow, I can't even believe this. But at what point do we actually act to do something? Like, we actually have to do something. And the more important element of that doing is when it's tied to resources, then we really have to do something. We really have to do something. So I support that. I support that. And so what do we do, though? Because that's 45,000, I don't know, I'll just put that there. Just pretend you didn't see me do that. So what do we do about this? What do we do about this? And so we support them in their, oh, boy, okay, you didn't have to do that, but thank you. I appreciate that. Is that Ian? No, Tim. All right. Thanks, Tim. Thanks. And Ian might be in the back still. The staff here has been so fantastic. And so it's important to support that, but let's support it just a bit more. And so for me, I'm actually going to write AASHE a little check saying, this is a little bit of a donation to try to cover that $45,000 because I really believe in what you're doing. And so I'm not saying that we all have to say, I will sign over my year's salary. I'm not asking you to do that, but I'm just asking you to think a little bit, like, what would it mean to say, yeah, I'm going to just send them a little bit of something, in order to say, and make it a real something. Don't just say something, and then send that. That's not going to help. But send something real to support them and say, no, I believe you. I'm with you. I am with you. I'm not just watching you do something. I will move along beside you and be with you in this work. I will be with you in this work. And if you can't sit on the committee, one of the best things we can do is just say, I support you and I've got your back. I literally have my hand on your back and I'm with you on that. So if you're so inclined, just send them a little something in order to try to cover that cost and reinforce that we believe in those kinds of decisions around resources. So before I dive into my stuff, I just want to introduce myself very quickly and say how I got here. I am not a sustainability professional, not even close. Like, I've never done it. I've never done it before. I mean, I try to be sustainable, but I'm not like a sustainability professional. I don't do that. What I am, if there is such a thing, is I'm a social justice professional, which sounds so weird to say, and it's so full of hubris, I don't even want to say it, but that's kind of what I do. However, in my undergrad, I went to Occidental College. I was a science major, a molecular biology major, and I was pre-med, and I wanted to be a cardiologist. And I love science so much, and so I've just been geeking out on it secretly since then, even though my senior year, Gary Martin said, you know, the average entrance age to med school is 27, why don't you take a couple years off? And I said, you know what, Gary, I will. This has been an exhausting 4 years. I am going to take some time off. So I went to Smith. I worked in student affairs. I started doing really horrible diversity training, and then got into education and realized, wow, that was horrible. And then got a master's and a doctorate in social justice education at UMass Amherst. And from there, I went to St. Cloud State University and taught in teacher ed for 12 years. And so, but I never lost my love, absolute mad love for science. And so what that meant is somewhere in the mid-2000s, I started working climate justice, climate change, and environmental issues into the intro to social justice education class for pre-service teachers. And they were like, lady, I don't even know what you're doing here. First, the class was already jam-packed, and they're like, why are you adding one more thing? But we were in the George W. Bush era, and so there was a bit of a gag rule on all government reports, and so these students didn't have a lot of information about this. They weren't exposed to a lot of this, and they thought I was making it up. And I said, it's fine if you think that, but you still have to do it. Like, I don't care what you think, you have to do it. And even if you don't feel like the impacts of this are going to affect your life, you're going to be teaching young people for whom this will dramatically affect their life, because we are going to be, thanks, I just got a sign that said advance the slides with a clicker, but just so you know, I'm not at a new slide yet, but I will. This is all just me like blah, 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 but I'll get to something. I'll get to something at some point. I will, I promise. I don't know what it'll be, but it'll be something. And so just to give you a little bit of information about myself is that I started doing that work with pre-service and in-service teachers and really started to recognize, even more than I already had, the really deep connections between climate, environment, sustainability, and education and social justice. Like they're inextricably linked, and those who think that we can talk about them as separate issues or add one to the other, that's just not how they live. That's not how they live in the world. And so I started to see that through my own teaching and training. I resigned 5 years ago, which is a weird thing to do if you have tenure. Many of my colleagues were like, where are you going? Thinking I was going to another institution. I said, I'm going to consult. And they went, oh, wow, that's awful. You know, and they backed away as if I was going to like infect them with something somehow, and they might resign too, weirdly. And so I started consulting, and I've worked with a lot of environmental nonprofits, folks working on climate justice, folks working in nonprofits and for-profits working at the intersections of this, foundations that are concerned about EJ and climate justice and sustainability issues. So I don't come as an expert in sustainability. I have just a little bit of information to share about social justice issues, however, and some connections that we can make to our work in sustainability. So I'm advancing the slide because before we get into the content, I want to just do a quick ground in, which is tricky with a large group, but whatevs. And so if you'll sit with your feet flat, sitting as upright as you're comfortable and able, and it's going to be different for everybody because everybody's got a different body, so that's no big deal. Eyes closed, or just cast your gaze to a neutral site. The goal is just don't be visually distracted. Breathe as deeply as you're comfortable and able, and again, that's going to be different for everybody. I mean, breathing is something that seems so benign, and yet in the United States, it's definitely impacted by race and class because only some neighborhoods have trash incinerators put in them. Only some neighborhoods have dump sites put in them. Other neighborhoods never see anything like that. So as you breathe, recognize that something so innate, so simple, is actually mediated in the U.S. by race and class. And what I'm going to ask us to do just for a minute, 60 seconds, is focus only on the felt sense of air as it comes in and out of your nose. Your mind's going to wander. No big deal whatsoever. That's what it does. And so yay for it. Just notice it and gently bring your attention back. The goal here is just for 60 seconds to try to build the muscle of attention. That's all we're doing, is building the muscle of attention. So we'll just do this together for a minute. And last, inhale and exhale, please. And if you've had a long few days, you're like, I'm out. Why did she do that? It's such a bad idea, lady. There's actually coffee in the back, so feel free to bip out and grab some. Why do we ground in when we talk about social justice issues? There's three primary reasons. The first is that this moment is the only moment from which we can act to create change. So if you want to do something about sustainability, particularly through the lens of social justice, if you want to be deeper in solidarity with other organizations who are working on this, guess what? You actually have to be in that moment. Learn from the past, plan for the future, but this is the only place you can act to create change. And when you're not present, you make a lot of mistakes. And they're called microaggressions in the literature, but around race, I tend to call them just everyday racism. Because for Native people and people of color in this country, racism isn't just an occasional thing, it's kind of the low background hum. And then have these really intense moments, and then we go back to the low background hum, not some default neutral space. And I tend to make a lot of mistakes, assumptions and comments and tone of voice, all that stuff when I'm not paying attention, when I'm so full of me, enough about me, what do you think about me? You know, it's just endless me. And I'm so caught in my own cycle of thinking, I'm not actually paying attention. But the third reason to ground is because it just speaks to our connection. And it's going to be very hard to sustain a livable planet if you're not even connected to it. It's very difficult to care about something and nurture something and really honor what is necessary, what needs to happen if you are utterly disconnected from it. And so to remind ourselves that we're actually connected, to remind ourselves, I've been bipping up and down that river situation a little bit, and even though it is a heavily engineered piece of water situation, there's still a moment where last night a duck went by and I was like, right on, ducky, I'm feeling good too. You know, I mean, it was just nice to be there. It was just nice to be there. And so if we're disconnected, then we are doomed, really. We're doomed because we start to treat nature and the natural world and the environment as a whole as an object instead of a subject that we're connected with. It's just an object that we act upon. And so it's just super important to ground in and be present. And all of this is about being deeper in our solidarity work, being more deeply connected to each other. And in talking about that, I just want to introduce three main points. How do we have a deeper solidarity? How do we do sustainability work through a social justice lens? And if you were in the Sunday day-long session, this isn't even going to come anywhere close to that. And that was jam-packed, and we didn't even get far enough in that. So please know that this is not the three-step program to social justice and sustainability. And then you get to say, I've got it. I'm done. Like, that's not it. That's not it. If there was such a thing, we'd already have done it. And so it doesn't exist. But these are just three really important points if I'm going to have a deeper level of solidarity with other people in doing sustainability work. And I'm suggesting that we do that deeper solidarity through a social justice lens. And so the first piece of these three is authentic relationships. We actually have to have really authentic relationships if we're going to do solidarity, a deeper solidarity across all kinds of lines of identity and interest in politics in order to move sustainability to a level where it is proportional to the problem. And I'm not ripping on recycling because I think it's super important, but that as a sole solution or a primary solution is not proportionate to the problem. And so only through a deeper solidarity, a broader coalition, can we actually mobilize ourselves to respond in ways that are proportionate to the problem. And so, authentic relationships. And I say this because I see sustainability as a movement, not as a thing to do, but it's a movement, and all movements happen through relationships. And no movement is successful if it's siloed, if it's like, this is our thing, and you know, you don't step over the line and nobody can come in. It just will never work. Thus, the importance of building relationships with campus entities in order to form a larger, stronger cross-campus coalition that will make serious sustainability actions and change possible. And that's not rocket science. I know that you already know that. The challenge, however, lies in the fact that some of your best collaborators are going to be historically and currently marginalized communities of people, marginalized by race or class or gender or disability, sexuality, age, religion, etc. It's going to be groups like women's centers and gender studies programs, ethnic studies programs, multicultural centers, students of color, Native student organizations, LGBTQI centers, student disability services, Hillel. All of these folks and more have the potential to be abiding partners and powerful voices for climate justice, environmental justice, and real deep sustainability work on your campuses. The catch is this. If you're going to collaborate with these communities, your relational approach needs to be authentic and not transactional. And here's what I mean. Transactional relationships are characterized by, hello, you do this for me, and I will do this for you. Oh, thank you very much. I'm going to go do that. Oh, we're going to go do that. And you go do that, and you're like, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for participating in that event. And it's just like a big bike-a-thon or a who-ju-what's-it or a thingy-mabob and all of those. But then as soon as the event is done, you're done. They're always very short-term. They're often commodified by how much can we spend or gain or what will we lose or gain. And they're really superficial. And so I was working with an environmental organization out west, and in their state, there was a group of almost exclusively white men who had developed a piece of state policy that was about carbon, and they were pushing this through. They wanted this to pass. Vote for this, and this was last year. And yet, that particular piece of legislation would have devastating impacts on Native communities, communities of color, and poor working class communities. And so a number of people came out against it who are environmental folks. And so what we saw was that this group of people who pushed this legislation forward had not really deeply interacted, authentically interacted with all of these marginalized communities. What they said is, we'll take a little bit of feedback, but this is what we're doing. And if you want to share some thoughts, that's great, but we're not going to change what we're doing. If you want to join us, fabulous, but we're not changing what we're doing, even though many, many, many people, many communities, many organizations said this will be harmful in the long run. I know you see the short-term gains, but this is going to hurt us. And so it didn't pass. It didn't pass. And I have to say, even if it would have had some short-term gains, and yes, that's true, I have to say I'm glad that it didn't pass, because on the ballot this year is a much more comprehensive policy, a much more comprehensive initiative that's actually going to serve that state well in the long run, and it will serve multiple communities. So that's an example of transactional. Like, you can kind of give us feedback or join us, but we're not actually in authentic relationship with you. So an authentic relationship, on the other hand, is vulnerable, honest, in process. You're always learning. You're lots of dialogue, very transparent, and very accountable. And so an example of this, and I'm not saying it's perfect by any stretch, but an example that came to mind as I was thinking about this in the 6 minutes before I walked in the room was the September 21st, 2014 People's Climate March in New York City. And I don't know if you were there. I was there. And I was like, whoa, this is great. Look at all these people. And they're like, oh, geez, that's a lot more people than we thought. I mean, it was a lot of people kind of showed up in New York City. And as an aside, I was heading home. I was on a Delta flight, and there was a flight attendant who just started ripping on that, and they disrupted traffic, and I can't believe how selfish they are. And I was all amped up front, and I'm feeling emboldened by the march, and so I pushed my friend back in her seat, and I was like, what are you talking about? And I got in a fight with the flight attendant as we're descending into Minneapolis. I'm like, that's completely false. And she's like, I've studied the climate. It's just the solar cycle. I'm like, that is not what's happening here. I mean, and the plane was going down, and Karen's like, what, shut up. You know, like, you're going to get on the no-fly list, and then you're in big trouble. So, yeah, anyway, that had nothing to do with anything. And so the point was, the New York City Climate March was really, really a good step in the right direction, because Native voices and POC voices were the first ones in that march. They occupied the first section of that march. That meant that we were working and organizing that march around the voices and the needs of historically marginalized people, because right behind them were service industry workers, labor unions, and then right behind them were youth groups and college student organizations from higher ed. And then Karen and I were like way in the back, and we didn't even care. It was so fun. And so the point I'm trying to make is, in authentic relationship, you will reorganize business as usual so that it actually serves the needs of the historically marginalized people you're talking about, that you're trying to build coalition with. And so if you want a deeper solidarity, and if you want broader coalitions on your campus with some of the groups that have historically been marginalized, you actually can't do business as usual. Things have to change. Things have to change. And one of the things that has to change is I need to move away from transactional relationships, and I need to move into more authentic ones. And so in order to be an authentic relationship with communities that have been marginalized, communities who are obvious and natural collaborators and co-leaders in a movement for a sustainable campus, you actually have to demonstrate an honest willingness to address social justice issues. Not as quid pro quo, I never really say that right the first time through, but instead as a way to counter a long history of mainstream leadership exploiting these groups for votes on the national level, for credibility in social movements, or for token representation on your admission brochures on all of your campuses. All the while, never having the intention of truly sharing power, voice, and space with these communities. And so what we want, again, is authenticity, and that means transparency, accountability. So I've been doing work for a couple of years with an old and influential environmental organization out west, and in the process of training them on racial justice work, they've been able to be much more effective in their forestry, water, and fisheries work, and they've done it all in deep and long-term coalition with a wide-reaching collaborative of POC Native folks. So the authenticity comes not from that. The authenticity comes in because they've made countless mistakes. They've owned them, they've tried to clean them up, but they've stayed in that relationship. It's a long-term relationship with this collaborative, even when it gets hard, even when they're scared of losing their organization's members and money and voters, even when they're just terrified that it won't work. And what they've seen is as they've worked their way through this fear with an authentic commitment to be in a relationship, they've been winning. Legislatively, they've been winning. In terms of funders, they've been winning because they're on the right side of this story. I also have a friend who's a woman of color doing sustainability work on her campus, and she's doing it through a social justice lens, and the coalitions that she's built with the Women's Center and Gender Studies program, as well as some of the student orgs, student of color, Native orgs, that has deeply enhanced that campus's ability to do sustainability work, because these orgs are now articulating a sustainability message. She's articulating an equity and social justice message, and their coalition is much broader and far more powerful, far more powerful. And so in all of this, because notice I've been talking about race, I've been saying you can't do it the way you've always been doing it, blah, blah, blah. And one of the things that sometimes comes up is folks start to feel guilty. Oh gosh, I feel bad, I feel really bad. You know, and I get it, you know, we feel guilty too. We feel guilty too, boop, 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 boop. And so, in case you're sitting here feeling guilty, so is the screen. It's feeling guilty, and it's just shut down, it's just feeling so bad. And so one of the things that we want to do is not get caught in guilt, shame, and blame. What we want to do instead is move to curiosity, empathy, or grief, and humility. We actually want to move to curiosity, empathy, and grief, and humility. So if you feel guilty or shameful, if these relationships seem difficult or hard, I get it. But don't get caught in the trap of guilt or shame or blame. Instead of saying, I feel bad that I don't know something about race, just get curious, why don't I know this thing about race? Instead of feeling shameful about things you've said or done in the past, just have some empathy and say, oh yeah, that's painful, that was hard. And instead of trying to pretend like you know everything, because you're a supervisor or a director or whatever and you're supposed to, just say, you know what, I don't know. I don't know. It's okay to be curious. Like, I wonder why I wasn't taught about Japanese internment in school. It seems like a weird thing to be left out, right? Like, but it was completely left out. Or instead of feeling bad, just have some heart. This is work of the heart as much as it's work of the head. And instead of pretending that you know, just say you don't know. I was potentially going to do some work with a white woman who's the executive director of an environmental organization. We almost had it, an environmental organization in the Twin Cities. And we were talking about our leadership styles and blah, blah, blah. And she said, but one of my greatest strengths is my humility. And I went, well, that's a fine quality. You know, like, what do you say to somebody who's like the most humble person they know? And so I was like, that's funny. Oh, that's not going to work. You know, it won't work. It won't work. Because that's not the attitude that I, as a white person, need to take with communities of color in order to have authentic, real relationships with communities of color. I would stand a much better chance of being authentic if I'm curious and say, you know, I don't know, but I really want to learn about racial justice issues. And I'm feeling the pain of what's happening in our society right now around race, because it's not good. It's not good. And it doesn't leave me frozen, but it just leaves me motivated. It leaves me feeling so heart-centered. And I know that I don't know, and I want to learn more. Like, that's not a wrong response. That's not a wrong response. And if you can kind of lean into this authenticity, if you can lean into this space of being curious and empathetic and humble, then what you open yourself up to is the capacity to better develop a social justice lens, a social justice framework. And importantly, this is a really important slide. So if you're taking pictures, take one of this. Or if you're like, oh, I should take a snap to say I was there. This is a good one to snap. This is a good one to snap. And so we are not doing diversity work. We're not doing cultural competency work. Social justice work is not about awareness and appreciation or skill development across cultural lines. Those two things matter. They really matter. But what equity and social justice work is, it's about systems in history. How do our systems work? What's happening in our history in terms of gender or race or class? And it's about access to resources, power, and privilege. And that's good for all of you, because most sustainability people are systems thinkers. And social justice is about systems thinking. It's absolutely about systems. And when I was a first year in college, my RA did a diversity activity, diversity bingo, and you're like, have someone sign the box. It's like from out of state, science major, lactose intolerant. And so you just go around and you're like, hey, oh, you're a science major. And you learn who's a science major, who's also from out of state. You also learn not to have ice cream with Joe. That's a bad idea. It's like, oh, no thanks, Joe. And so you learn all of that stuff. But that doesn't help us have a conversation about racism. Like that, we never quite got there from the diversity bingo. But if you're in a social justice or an equity frame, you will get there, because that's what it's designed to do. Systems and history and access to resources, power, and privilege. And so when we talk about developing a social justice frame, which is point number 2, we're not talking about diversity, not even close. We are talking about equity, or more, the phrase I tend to use is social justice, systems and history, access to resources, power, and privilege. And to do this column, to do the equity and social justice column, it's not a checklist. We do at our consulting firm, because we consult all over. I travel about 3 weeks a month, and we consult everywhere. And we do get calls saying, can you come do a 42-minute workshop on racial justice and eliminating racial bias from our entire company? And I'm like, no, actually, no, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Because if it was possible, we would have done it. But even if it was possible, I still wouldn't do it for you, because you need to have the developmental experience and process of getting there. You have to get there. So it's not a checklist. Instead, it's a lens. It's a framework. It's a way of understanding the world. And for race, for example, it means exploring race, racism, and whiteness, how systems and history have informed race, racism, and whiteness, and how they play out in our society. And that sounds theoretical, so I'll just tell you my own story around race, is that I grew up in Las Vegas, not a socially just place. I wasn't predisposed to social justice issues and analysis. I did really well in high school. Finished right near the top of my class. I wasn't the top. I mean, Robin deserved it. She's great. And so I'm not taking anything away from her. I was kind of close. I was kind of up there. So I was well educated on paper, horribly educated in the ways of the world. So I went to Los Angeles. I said all kinds of stupid racist stuff my first year. I was consciously racist in high school for reasons in my family I don't need to get into, but family stuff was going on there. So I was like, blah, 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 blah. But going to LA, I was like, I probably shouldn't be saying all that stuff. So my intention was not to be racist, but my socialization kept getting in the way. So I had a 2-week intention of no longer being racist. I had 18 years of socialization into being racist. And so I was at Oxy, and I was in a first-year seminar sitting at a long table, rolly chairs, about 12 of us. I don't remember the professor's name. It was a white guy, brown hair, part at the side, blue polo, thin yellow stripes. And I only remember that because I was so terrified and panicked, because we were talking about something, and I was like, blah, blah, and I said some stupid racist thing. And everybody was like, what? Crickets, right? And they all looked at me, and I was like, oh. And they just tore me apart. They absolutely shredded me. And I'm blushing, and I'm sweating. I'm like, oh, no, you don't understand. And they're like, we understand. And it was like, I often say it's like WWF racial justice, because as soon as one was done, they like tag and send the other one in. And I look to the professor for help, and he rolls away from the table as if to say, feast on her, And they did. They just shredded me. And that happened so many times in my first year of college, I couldn't even believe it. So I was consciously racist for periods of my life. And then that first year, I was unconsciously, unintentionally, but still racist. And so what that will tell you is that if you are white, let's say, in this room, and you have not actually read, learned, thought about, if you don't have any really intense, comprehensive life experience to teach you about issues of race, then there's a good chance that you're doing the same thing I was doing. There's a good chance. Not because you're a bad person, because I wasn't a bad person, but I was just parroting and regurgitating things that I had been taught. Deep misinformation and profound misunderstandings about the world, specifically about race, that just came flying out of my mouth. Sophomore year, I moved from, so it was conscious, unconscious, and my sophomore year, I was like, don't call me racist. And that's characterized by heavily tokenized events. And so on your campuses, it might be, putting $20,000 down to have Cornel West come speak, which is a good idea, because he's amazing. But that talk has nothing to do with institutional change. And so you can have really powerful sustainability weeks. You can have really powerful educational opportunities. You can have these cross-coalition, deeper solidarity moments, but if they don't eventually translate to institutional change, then they're going to feel and end up being quite tokenizing. And so my example is Desmond Tutu was on campus, 3 major sections, 2 aisles. I went down one. I was like, what's up, everybody? Because I wanted everyone to know I was there. Hi, hi, hi. Up the other aisle, blah, blah, blah. Sat down, listened to him talk, didn't hear a word he said. Went back to the residence hall. My RA, Nina, said, so let's have a chat about what everybody learned. I'm like, okay. Because I wanted to make it seem like I'm not racist anymore. And so I was sitting there, and she gets to me, and she's like, what did you learn? And I said, so much. I mean, it's Desmond Tutu. How could you possibly put it in one sentence? She's like, I know, he's incredible. Just pick one thing. And I was like, ah. And I had nothing to say because I wasn't listening for change. I was just going through the motions. And so I'm going to encourage you that if you're really going to try to have a deeper solidarity, your engagement with social justice work needs to not be going through the motions. You actually have to be committed to some change. So from there, I grew up a little bit, I learned a little bit more, and I realized, oh yeah, there is this thing called racism, and it's horrible. But I didn't understand that it was a system. I thought it was just about the way people were being treated, and I felt really bad about that. And so I was gonna go save people of color. And I was working at Smith at the time, and I was doing horrible diversity training, and I was, after training, a black woman was standing next to me. Her name's Erica, multi-generational African-American, gets race and red as black, and I said something stupid. Again, I have no idea, but I do remember she looked at me, and she's like, why are you even here? And I said, I'm here to empower you. And she, thank you. And she was like, and I'm sure the Rolodex of answers, one of them was like, must not kill tiny white lady, because that would be bad. I'm sure she was like, I just want to smash this pot over your head. And so what she said instead was, I don't need you to empower me. I actually need you to get out of the way, because you're the problem. You are the problem. And I was so offended by that. You better believe I went to my colleagues, and I was like, you will never believe what Erica said. I relayed the whole story, and they're like, you said what? And I was like, oh, I know this, I know what's happening here. And so they sent me to the racism literature, and I started reading about systemic and structural racism, and I realized, oh, wow, it actually is a system. Oh, who knew? Everybody. No, yes, okay. And so I started realizing, oh, there is a system of racial oppression, and it's operating all of these really profound ways. And just because I hadn't seen it before doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And so just because you might be on your campus saying, I don't see how racial justice is connected to sustainability, it doesn't mean that connection isn't there. It just means you don't see it. And that's a really important kind of piece of the humility. Because I was operating from the place of, if I didn't see it, it didn't exist. And clearly it did. And clearly I was actually part of it. So I see systemic racism, I'm like, oh, wow, we got to end racism, blah, 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 blah. And I'm at these marches and events and this and that, and people are like, hey, Heather, it's great you're here, but why are you here? And it's like, I'm here to end racism. And they're like, that's neat, but why are you here? And I'm confused by the question. I'm like, well, I'm here to end systemic and structural racism. And they're like, that's so great. That's almost what you said 2 seconds ago. Why are you here? And what they wanted to know is, what's my investment as a white person in ending this system? And underneath that is really, can I trust you? I want to know you're not going to leave when it gets hard. Because white people do leave when it gets hard. I've done that. I can't even tell you how many times. The conversation gets heated. I'm in a department meeting. I'm like, I'd love to stay, but I really got to go pick up the kids. They're like, Heather, you don't even have kids. Where are you going? You don't have any kids. I'm like, well, somebody's kids need to be picked up, and I got to go do it. And so I just panic because I don't know what's going on. I don't know how to handle these situations. And so white people tend to be real good we're good starters. We're good trapper-keeper folders and all brand new pencils at the beginning of the year. But when stuff really gets hot, if you don't know what I'm talking about, skip it. It doesn't matter. Some people do, though. I know that some of you do know what I'm talking about. Yeah, trapper-keepers. They were awesome. And so we're good starters, but we leave when it gets hard. And that's what they were asking. Are you going to leave when it gets hard? And so what do I do to demonstrate I'm not going to leave when it gets hard? I stop talking about them and systemic racism, and I start talking about myself. And my role in this as a white person, not out of guilt, shame, and blame, but just out of a recognition, like, this system isn't working for me either. In the short run, I get extraordinary privilege. I never get pulled out of line in TSA, and I know that. But in the long run, it is just like a corrosive thread to my soul. Because every time I turn away from racism, every time I turn it off or pretend I don't understand, I'm auctioning off just a piece of my integrity. Because I want to be a moral person. I want to be somebody that says, no, I am here for the good of the good. I want to be somebody that lives by values and has a moral compass, but I compromise that every time I turn away from issues of race. And cisgender men compromise that every time you don't respond to that sexual harassment comment or that sexist joke. And owning class people and professional middle class people, we do it when we don't pay attention to the needs or we use classist language to identify people. I mean, if you have some measure of dominance and you're not critical about it, from my experience and in everything I've read and done in all these years, I end up unconsciously, unintentionally, for the most part, contributing to the problem. And so I'm not saying that out of guilt, shame, and blame. I'm saying that because I want a different story. I want a different experience. And so what happened for me is I started reading about white privilege and white supremacy. And I know that language freaks everybody out. So how about this? I just started reading the ways that white people benefit from this system. If you deny housing to Native people and people of color, the houses don't magically disappear. They just become more available to the one group that's left. And so that's a benefit to me. That's a benefit to me. And I started learning about that, and then I realized something that felt profound for me. I don't know if it really is profound, but it felt profound for me, is that most of my white liberal life, I'd been standing safely and dryly on the shore, shouting good tidings to Native people and people of color as they rowed against the tide of racial oppression. And I mean, I was in it. I was like, good job, rowers. I love rowers. Yeah, rowers. Writing checks to rowers. And I've got signs in my yard. Yeah, I love you, rower. I'm catapulting food out to the boat. Yay, rower. You know, I'm into the row situation. I'm so supportive. But I've never actually left the shore. I never left the shore. I was always safe and dry and really comfortable. And so the journey for those of us that are white in terms of race, male in terms of gender, professional middle class in terms of economic issues, the journey is to kick our shoes off, swim out to the boat, get in the boat, and row. Row alongside Native people and people of color. You want deeper solidarity on your campuses? You want to have a greater effect in your sustainability efforts? Then figure out how to work in profound and long-lasting coalition with historically marginalized groups. And the way you do that is you get in the boat and row. And row, and you'll make mistakes, and you'll be out of sync, and you'll splash, and you'll clank other people's oars, and you'll fall out, and you're drenched, and you're like, it's me again, you know, and you'll get back in, and they're like, here's a towel, you know, and you're like, okay, thanks, and blah, blah, blah. And eventually you'll get the rhythm of it. And here's what happened to me, is eventually I got a little bit of rhythm, and I just happened to look over, and I saw the shore, and I was like, what? That is the tiniest patch of shore. Like, how could I possibly have thought that that was a whole life? Look how small, I mean, wow. I didn't even know the beach was that long, let alone forests and trees and mountains behind it. Like, I had such a small view of life. And I'm not ripping on people from small towns. I taught in central Minnesota. I had a student from a town of 25, and I was like, 25? She's like, it was my whole family. I was like, that's amazing. That's amazing. I actually really like that. I really like that. That's cool, because you really do know everybody in town. I mean, you do. And so I'm not ripping on that. That's her experience. But to pretend and defend as if that is the whole world, and to more kind of problematically espouse opinions about what other people should do when I've never left my tiny bubble, that doesn't work logically. But if I get out and get in the boat, it's not just me being an ally to someone else. It is a rite of passage for me to see, like, I now can see the whole shore. I actually can see the whole picture. Or said differently in the United States, I actually can see how racial justice deeply and profoundly connects to sustainability issues. I can see it now. I get it, and I get why it matters. And just because I can't see it, or maybe if you're sitting in the room and you're like, this is a bunch of crap, why am I sitting here listening to this? I should have left, I should have moved my flight up. That's cool, and that's cool. Just hang in there, because again, just because sometimes we don't understand these concepts or disagree with them, it doesn't mean they're wrong. Just because I would have argued, no, my life is great in this tiny patch, it wasn't until I moved that I realized there was more. There's more. It wasn't that was horrible, it's just that there's more. And so it's a really liberatory thing. A couple caveats though. When you get in the boat, don't name the boat after ourselves. That's really important. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't slap a Hackman name on the boat. Don't stick a flag in it and say, I just discovered a boat. That's also a horrible idea. And don't turn to the people of color who've been running the boat for 4 centuries and say, I've got some feedback for you. Like, don't do that. You just got there. Don't give feedback. Don't give feedback. Just quietly and humbly row, row, row. And don't even acknowledge how humble you are. Just row. Just row. Just row. We don't want to do what our friend did. And so very quickly, a couple more points. What does this have to do? What does a social justice framework have to do with sustainability? And if you were in my day-long session, this is a very quick recap, or even the Monday one, is that there's 3 primary areas where I'm not going to go into that social justice helps us understand sustainability right now. Number 1 is it helps me understand really deep causal factors that got us here. So, for example, one of the aspects of me being socialized as a white person in the United States is rugged individualism. Pull myself up by my bootstraps, and I love the phrase, I was born in the log cabin, I built with my own hands. Like, that's not even possible, right? But I really live by that somehow magically, and it's me, and I'm, like that whole thing. And I'm not saying that we're not independent people and we don't have stuff going on. What I'm saying is part of the marker of what it means to be white is to be a rugged individual, at least how I was socialized into that in this country. I'm not saying I always believe that, but what I've been socialized into is to act like that. And so as a result of demonstrating, or a way of demonstrating my individualism is I will own my individual home, I will own my individual lawnmower, I will own my individual car, I will own my individual stuff. Do you see where I'm going with this? I will have all kinds of my own junk, even though all 17 of my neighbors also have lawnmowers, and we could probably share. No way! I want my lawnmower, mine, me, mine, I, whoop-a-pa. And so I get a lot of individual gratification through consumption. And so one of the examples of causals, if you're trying to reduce student consumption on your campus, but you're allowing this notion of what it means to be white and rugged individual consumption to thrive on your campus, good luck reducing consumption. It's likely not going to happen because the 4th-century ethos of, yeah, me, mine stuff, that is going to beat out your flyers for sustainability. And so if you want to really have students reduce consumption, because we can't just do downstream forever, we actually need to get way upstream, we actually do have to ask questions about what does it mean to be white in this country? What does it mean to be professional middle class? What does it mean to be, have any gender identity along a continuum in this country? What does that mean? What does it mean to be a person of color? What does it mean to be poor, working class? Like, what do these things mean? And how do they shape the way we move through the world unconsciously and unintentionally? And so causal factors for this moment is where social justice will help. Impacts, who's impacted and how and why, poor working class communities, communities of color, paying critical attention to impacts and who needs some aspects of sustainability resources perhaps more than others. Impacts is another reason. And who's leading this and the vision and the leadership of this work. That is a third area where a social justice framework will help you. Interestingly, though, there have been several occasions where I've shared this information with campus sustainability, environment, and climate folks, and they resist this content. They sit there, and on rare occasions I do mandatory trainings, and I'll walk in and 40 people are in the room, and they're like, and the thought bubble above their head is, we already hate you, lady, you know, and it's like, oh, this is going to be a great day. You know, it's like a super fun day, super fun day. But in less kind of demonstrative ways, I've noticed that on campus, people resist this content in ways that deeply parallel the ways climate deniers resist the reality of climate disruption. And so I'll talk about social justice issues with sustainability, and I will sometimes hear after the talk someone say, you know what, I don't see oppression, and so it's not really happening, I don't think, on our campus. That's very similar to the way people say, I can't see climate change right in front of me, and so it must not be happening, and I think you're making it up. Or I'll hear some folks say to me, directly or indirectly, you know, I think your social justice thing is just a lefty liberal agenda, and it doesn't have anything to do with sustainability. In fact, I think it's meant to destroy white people, men, and rich people. And that's very similar, in my mind, to the way that some folks will claim talking about climate change is a lefty liberal agenda designed to destroy business and the economy. A third kind of point of resistance I hear to a social justice frame is I don't want to have to change anything about how I'm living my life and moving through the world. And that's very similar to what Dr. Hayhoe suggested as part of climate resistance. And so my point about this is it does seem so interesting to me that while many people in sustainability are so frustrated by the lines of logic, if you will, about how they resist climate, environmental, and sustainability issues, sustainability folks and other folks in this movement get so frustrated by people saying those three things, they often then use those same three lines to dismiss social justice frame and its connection to sustainability work. And so if someone you know, or perhaps even you, are disagreeing with the need for a social justice frame within sustainability by proffering some of those same sentiments, perhaps it's wise to challenge them on the inconsistency of their logic, and in fact help them lean into this a bit more. And so the challenging others and kind of helping people along, that brings me to my third point. So we're almost done. We're almost done. I covered that. And so my third point is commit to action. Action, action, action. And there's a few key things here. Number one is find your edge and lean in. Lean in. And I don't mean like, as I said in the sessions that I've done since I've been here, I'm not talking about Sheryl Sandberg lean in where it's like, I'm just going to make myself feel better or build my self-esteem. I'm not talking about that. I'm sure Sheryl's great. I'm sure she's a great person. So I'm just talking about what she wrote in her book. What I mean by lean in is like a ski jumper, which is a horrible and dumb thing to do. But let's pretend you're still going to do it. Is that if you're a ski jumper, you don't jump and go, oh my gosh, and lean back because you're dead. As I said to the group the other day, I grew up in ABC's Wide World of Sports where that ski guy crashed into the back. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Like, that was horrifying. You're like, oh. And I'm definitely an empathetic injury person. So when I hear, like, the Joe Theismann for the Washington team, when he broke his, and they showed it a million times, I was like, oh, ow, every time. Oh, gosh, I can still feel it right now, actually. Oh, that hurts so bad. And so I don't like the idea of doing this, but it is apt in terms of what action needs to look like. Is that I lean in, and so I lean into my edge. What's my edge of my comfort, the edge of my knowledge, or the edge of my willingness to take a risk? And I don't put my hands in front of me in a defensive way. Ski jumpers actually put their hands behind them. They completely lower their defenses. And I don't crouch out and protect myself. I actually have to extend and make myself vulnerable. So if you're going to act, one of the best ways to do that, to measure the action, is to lean into your edge of knowledge, comfort, or skill, lean into your levels of vulnerability, and lean into putting your defenses down. Put the defenses down and just give it a go. Give it a go. The second place of action, or way that I can think about action in this third major point, is shared commitment means shared risk. It really does. And so I can't say I support all of these movements, but I never am inconvenienced by having to participate in them. Shared commitment means shared risk. And there's a clip I show sometimes in my trainings, and one of the most important pieces, it's about kind of protesting racial oppression and racial injustice, and you see these rows and rows and rows of white people with their arms out, saying, no, you're not gonna harm people of color in this demonstration. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And I'm not saying all of you have to get out there and get in the streets, but I am saying that I know as faculty member that we would very much talk in our classes about the need for social justice and social change and this and that, but we rarely took the risk because I wanted to go from assistant to associate or associate to full. Or I wanted that grant, or I wanted that publication, so I wasn't going to really risk that much. I wasn't going to get in the provost's face. I wasn't going to do blah, blah, blah. Actually, I did do that because I was like, I'm tenured. I don't care. I'm not going for full, so hi, you know? And so I was like, may I meet with you again? And so I didn't mind it, really. But I watched a lot of my colleagues really say, well, I can't do that. And they had all kinds of amazing reasons why they can't. And yet I watched the Native faculty and faculty of color in terms of race. They never had the luxury of saying, I can't do that, because if somebody didn't stand up, then this really harmful policy, practice, or procedure was going to continue. And so I cannot constantly relegate the work around racial justice to the same group of people that's being targeted by it. I have to do something. And I would really appreciate it if people who identify as men would do the same. Like, I don't need you to hold the door for me. I probably can get it, unless I got lots of stuff in my arms in that situation. Otherwise, I bet I can get it. What I would love for you to do, though, is turn to any one of your male colleagues and say, you know what, I find that Harvey Weinstein sexual harassment thing really appalling. What do you think about the unconscious, unintentional, or or silent ways that sexual harassment persists in our institution. Like, just let that be a water cooler conversation, you know, just like, hi, Bob, hey, Jim, by the way, Bob, and just try it. Like, see what happens, see what happens. Oppression is absolutely and always going to thrive in your silence. Silence is complicity. It will always find a home in your silence. And so even if you don't know what you're saying, and even if your voice is trembling, speak up. Speak up. Do something. Take some action. And the third piece about taking some action, that this is not about being an ally. Being an ally has a little bit of distance, like I'm going to go help you. It's actually about being a co-conspirator, a deep advocate, a real partner on your campus to historically marginalized communities of people and say, I'm in it for the long haul. I'm here with you. I know this is hard, and to be honest with you, I'm kind of freaking out right now, but I'm going to stay. I'm going to stay. I might get scared and really start to freeze up and say stupid stuff, but I'm going to stay. I'm going to stay. And so white people in Charlottesville were really phenomenal in the way that they stood and they stayed. And a complex set of folks in the Minneapolis-St. Paul Women's March in January, they expected about 10 to 12,000 people there. There were 95,000 people in a march in January in Minneapolis. I mean, it was like you couldn't see who anybody was because we all had our big suits on, but it was like, hey, good job. Yeah, you too. You know, I mean, and so we took up a lot of space because there's a lot of puff, right? It was a lot of puff. And so, actually, unfortunately, it wasn't that cold because it was a warm January last year, but still, we were bundled. And so we saw that. We saw white people stand up to white supremacists in Charlottesville. We saw a complex group of people in the Women's March, and there are countless other examples where those who have privilege and access stand and stood alongside those who are getting kicked around. And it makes us all better. With sustainability content, if students of color or Native organizations on your campuses started doing programming or more programming around environmental racism, that means they're priming everyone at their sessions on their campus to be open to deeper conversations about sustainability. Because environmental racism is a really good on-ramp to say, what do we need to do structurally on our campus to make sure this doesn't happen? And that's where you come in. And you say, I have some ideas. And so if we start to attend to these issues and take action, we gain some credibility and we build some trust, and it allows those deeper collaborations to really foster and grow. And as I said, there's really something quite powerful for everyone when we do this. I train in communities of faith quite a bit, and I love Unitarian Universalists. They're so awesome. Like, you use love. And I'm like, what do you love about that? We love love. And I'm like, that's so great, because I love that you love love. And so we're just going to love each other up right now. But I was doing a training in a majority white, historically white UU church. It had about 800 regular members and maybe another 200 that kind of came in and out. It was overwhelmingly white, as I said. And there was a white woman who came up to me after the final training, and she said, you know, I've been going to this church for 25 years, and I've never felt my faith come alive as much as I have in this training. And it wasn't about me, so don't hear that as like, look how great I am. The content is what did it, right? Waking up. The work for white people or men or anybody who's in a dominant group is to wake up, catch up, show up, and clean up. And she had woken up, and she was going to get busy in that church. But more importantly than any kind of political agenda or any kind of issue orientation, her faith came alive. She's like, I feel like I'm finally living in my deepest possible way the tenets of UU. And this is amazing. It's an amazing thing. I was like, right on, sister, go for it. Go for it. I'm doing a gender training for a large national architecture firm. And one of the men in the training who's on the executive team came up and he said, because I give a lot of homework in between trainings, and he's like, but I've had conversations with my daughter and she's in her first year of college. He's like, that we've never had. And he starts getting very emotional about this. And he's like, and I feel like I have failed her as her father all these years because I should have been talking to her about this all along. Like, how did I miss this? How did I miss this huge thing? We started talking about sexual harassment. She told me all the things she has to do in order to keep herself safe. And I was furious and ashamed all at the same time. And I was like, Tim, you don't need to be ashamed about it. You just need to be engaged. Turn that anger into action and be engaged, and don't let another day go by where you don't attend to this issue. And really do right by your relationship with your daughter, because she's been carrying this burden for a long time, and you're just arriving to this party. So I'm not interested in the guilt and the shame and the blame. I'm interested in what will you do now? What will you do now to make this architecture firm far more safer and far more accessible, remember that it's about access, to women and trans folks, cisgender women and trans folks? And the last one, kind of story about how this works for us before I close, is that in 2001 I was teaching an intro course on race, racism, and whiteness in the US, and it was for fall semester, first-year students, mandatory class at St. Cloud State. Not because we're great, but because we've been sued so many times, we had to do mandatory classes for racial justice. And so I had a white student, I can't remember his name, so let's say it's Paul. And he came in and he was so mad about having to take this class. He's like, I can't believe you're brainwashing us, and blah, 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 blah. And he sat there and he was just pissed. And then he was a first generation white cisgender man. And he was just so furious about it all. I was like, yeah, okay, that's cool. You can, he's like, and I don't even like you. And I was like, that's fine. I don't need you to like me. I just need you to read, right? And so just do the reading. I don't care if you like me or not. And it was somewhere, it's a 15-week semester. It was somewhere around week 12, maybe. I don't really remember exactly. And it was a Friday night at 12:30. And Paul, let's say his name, calls me, and I answer the phone. He's like, Dr. Hackman! I'm like, yeah? He's like, this is Paul! I'm like, hey, Paul. He's like, I'm at the bar, right? And I was like, I shouldn't know that, right? Because I know you're underage. That's not helpful. And he's like, you're never going to believe what happened. And I was like, what happened, man? Tell me what happened. And he said, I was at the bar getting another beer, and this guy says blah, blah, blah. And I said, hey, man, that's racism. You can't be saying that. And I told him what you said about the da-da-da and da-ba-ba-ba, and I told you blah-blah. And he's like, no. And I said, and he kind of gives me this back and forth, and I'm like, oh. And I'm waiting for it to end, and then we fought each other in the house, and got kicked out, and it didn't end there. He's like, and so then I just walked away, but I knew I was right. And I was like, wow, Paul, that's amazing. That's incredible. I can't wait. I mean, be sure to share that when we check in class, because I always, every Tuesday, I said, so what happened over the weekend that relates to class? I said, be sure to check in class. And he's like, I will. I just thought you'd want to know. Bye. Click, and he hangs up. And I was like, oh, that's so amazing. And how did you get my home phone number? I don't remember putting that on the syllabus, but that's cool. That's cool. And so Tuesday morning rolls around, and I thought, he was so plowed, he's never even going to remember this. And so I said, anything from the weekend, and his hand shoots up, and he tells a story. And he says, you know what, I realized over the course of this semester so far that there's just a lot of stuff I didn't know. And then that guy didn't know it. And so I just felt like I should have told him some things. I mean, he wasn't like floating out of the room as a racial justice advocate, but he had change. And I was like, that took 12 weeks. Not even a full 12 weeks. It took 75 minutes a day, twice a week, and then he did a couple hours of homework and reading, lots of conversation with his peers, and Paul didn't kind of shrink in guilt and shame. He realized, like, whoa, I just didn't know this, and it's not okay. It's just not okay, and so I'm going to do something about it. And I'm not suggesting that all students go to bars and do that. It didn't become a homework assignment, like go to the bar and have a conflict. But my point about this is that benefited Paul. Like, he felt better. He wasn't doing that to suck up, because students in my classes knew that there's not a chance that would work. He was doing it because it was the right thing to do. He was doing it because it made him feel like a better human being. Tim is doing it because he wants a better relationship with his daughter, right? That woman at the UU is doing it because she wants a more intimate relationship with her faith. And so lest you think that this is just a burden, social justice work for members of dominant groups, it's not. It's a coming home to what we were promised at birth. And that systems of oppression have divided and taken from us, and it's a reclamation of our best selves. And in this moment, when we're so deeply divided by race in such a toxic national climate, we are not our best selves. Whatever your political affiliation is, you can't claim like this is the best of the United States. It's not. We're in a lot of pain, we've got a lot of fear, and we don't really have enough tools, skills, or knowledge to really, how do we navigate it, to know how to navigate it. And there's no substitute for learning, there's no substitute for integrating it into our lives, and there's no substitute for growing, leaning in and taking the risk. And I'll tell you this, I know that this sounds hard. I know it's a lot of information. I know it seems like it's not about you. That's other people's issue. But if we are all interconnected, which we are, this is about you. And it's time to take action in ways that you may never have thought about before. And if some of what I've said has challenged you or confused you or even rubbed you the wrong way, as I said earlier, that's cool. It doesn't mean I'm wrong. It just means that you're having some kind of struggle or tension with it. And so what do? We start with ourselves. I'm not saying you have to go out and organize a march. Begin with you. Learn more, pull it into your lives, integrate it into the who you are and the what you are in the world, and then take even small action. Sometimes the small action is with your family. Like I used to have, I would have students in fall semester, we'd cover all kinds of race and colonization, genocide, all kinds of racial justice content. And then this thing called Thanksgiving would come around. And these are mostly white students, and so they go home to almost all white families, and they'd wait for their moment, and they're sitting at the table with all their relatives, and they're like, pass the racist imperialist mashed potatoes, you know, and there they go. Like, it just explodes, right? It totally blows up. And there's no Adele there to go, hello, you know, like, that didn't happen. And so it just blew up. It absolutely blew up. And they got relegated to the card table in the corner with their 6-year-old nieces and nephews, and they're like, did you know these are racist imperialist mashed potatoes? Nobody knows what's going on. And so students come back, and I usually have like 2 or 3 out of 40 students of color, or 30-ish, depending on class size. And I said, how did it go, everybody? How was your weekend? And it was only ever the white students who raised their hand and said, my family said I ruined the holiday. Native students and students of color never said, I talked about race at dinner and it ruined the dinner, because most people of color and most Native people talk about race all the time. It's white people who never talk about it. And so because we never talk about it, to raise it is not just, oh, that's interesting information, I didn't learn about that. It's the resistance is so profound. It's like, you ruined our Thanksgiving. You ruined it. And so, you know, those students got a real lesson of like, wow, this is hard work. This is gonna be hard work. And, you know, we're not at our best when we're resisting and fighting. And so, thankfully, there's an organization called Standing Up for Racial Justice, SURGE, and they actually have a Thanksgiving placemat that you can print out and laminate. So if you're in those it didn't exist when I was teaching, but if you're in those conversations with your family and Uncle Al goes, that's a bunch of crap, you can say, actually, Al, according to the treaty of, you know, and you can just whip up your turkey and see whip up your tofurkey and see what's happening. Be like, no, that's not true, man. And Uncle Al is not going to have a racist imperialist placemat, and so he's not going to be able to do anything. He's just going to say, cause, you know, cause, and that's his answer. And that is my Uncle Al, and I love him so much. But he's the most racist, sexist, homophobic Democrat I have ever met in my life. I mean, it's egregious, and he only watches 2 channels, MSNBC and Golf Channel, and he yells ferociously at MSNBC about all kinds of things. I mean, he agrees with them, but he's just furious about stuff, but he also yells at the Golf Channel, and I don't know what he's yelling about at the Golf Channel. That wasn't a birdie, damn it, you know, like, I don't know what that's about, but he's just furious all the time. And so my Uncle Al would get caught by that placemat because he'd look over, and I'd be showing him the laminated placemat, and he wouldn't have much to say. And so it's about small steps, small steps. One of the lessons some of those students learned is I probably should have just talked to one relative, not said it to the whole table. I'm like, that's fair, small test. Next year, try the table. And so what we can do is begin with ourselves, we can learn, we can integrate, and we can implement. Start with yourself, with the action. And so I want to close with a reading for someone I just adore so much, Bell Hooks. I've met her twice, and both times I was like, oh gosh, I really want to impress Bell Hooks. And so I was like, what am I going to say? And both times I got so overwhelmed, I was like, hi. And that was it. That was all I could manage to say. And she's like, hello, you know, and it just wasn't really amazing. It wasn't an amazing moment, I have to say. But I adore Bell Hooks. And this is from her book, All About Love, from a while back. And it's the chapter, Living Our Values, or it's the section, Living Our Values, and it's the chapter about living by a love ethic. And she says this, awakening to love can happen only as we let go of our obsession with power and domination. So I'll say that one more time because it's a pretty big statement. Awakening to love can happen only as we let go of our obsession with power and domination. To bring a love ethic into every dimension of our lives, our society would need to embrace that change. And we do this by choosing to work with individuals to embrace that change, choosing to work with individuals we admire and respect. We do this by committing to give our all to relationships. We do this by embracing a global vision wherein we see our lives and our fate as intimately connected to those of everyone else on the planet. Commitment to a love ethic transforms our lives by offering us a different set of values to live by. In large and small ways, we make choices based on a belief that honesty and openness and personal integrity need to be expressed in every public and private decision. Living by a love ethic, we learn to value loyalty and a commitment to sustain bonds over material advancement. Behaving unethically with no thought to the consequences of our actions, however, is a bit like eating tons of junk food. While it may taste good in the end, the body is never really adequately nourished and remains in a constant state of lack and longing. And our souls feel this lack when we act unethically, when we behave in ways that diminish our spirits and dehumanize others. But living by a love ethic has the capacity to transform ourselves, our society, and our entire world. And I don't say that from some superfluous place. I say it because at the end of the day, that's really what we want as human beings. And I don't mean some kind of Hallmark kind of love. I mean the kind of love that when you're having your hardest day, somebody says, it's gonna be okay. You're gonna be all right. I'm here with you, we'll do it together. I don't know how to fix it either, but I won't leave you. I won't leave you. And we're mammals. We do love, we do connect, we do tend and befriend, and we do want that. And these systems of racial and gender and economic oppression and other forms of oppression, they are designed to divide us because that's how they stay in power and in place. They are anathema to our humanity, and they will always scuttle your sustainability work. They will always make it less than it could be. They will always limit its efficacy. They will always keep you siloed, and they will always make it just not quite enough. Not because you're not enough, but because they're in the way. They are in the way. And so my hope for all of you in your work is that you can embrace some of these pieces of authentic relationship and beginning to work and develop a social justice frame and taking some measure of action now. Because so much depends on the choices we make now. So much depends. And I have absolute faith that we will choose the path that is authentic and just and caring to create a world in which we can all thrive. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks again to Dr. Hackman, everybody. Come on. Here, hold on, don't go anywhere. All right, yeah. Sorry, I had to take advantage of the moment, right? Because that's what it's about. So a couple words in terms of takeaway messages from Dr. Hackman. Get a laminated placemat, right? You got to get a fact sheet, equip yourself so you know what you're talking about. Number two, listen and breathe. Listen and breathe, right? You got to kind of walk in the shoes. You know, I'm a white guy. I have a beard. I have a flannel shirt on. How many of you are one of those guys, right? So we kind of have to understand we can walk everywhere we want, and it was designed that way. It didn't happen by accident. And the third thing, to kind of, as a call to action, build relationships. You know, go to barbecues, have potlucks, and then lead with your leading edge or your changing edge. So with that, I'd like to once again thank our sponsors, exhibitors, and host institutions. It is the support that these organizations and institutions allow us to keep this conference affordable and provide more engaging experience for all, like keynote speakers with Dr. Hackman. In addition, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that October is Campus Sustainability Month, right? So thanks to support from Colgate and the Every Drops Counts pledge, we hope that you will continue to focus on water conservation, especially you Texas folks, right? And celebrate Campus Sustainability Month throughout the rest of October. Finally, and last but not least, this event would not be possible without the motivated community who works tirelessly to advance sustainability both on the campus and in the community, as well as dedicated to this conference, the volunteers that make it happen, the board of directors, and all the committees that support the mission. And last but certainly not least, the hardworking and energetic staff that continually strive towards producing important resources, right? So please join me in welcoming to the stage the AASHE staff, Megan Fay, Zon Iser, Allison Jones, Marguerite Williams, Kimberly Smith, Julian Detramote Smith, Monica Urbanski, Chris Belton, Daita Sergi, Crystal Simmons, Jessica Chase, Nakia Johnson, Andrea Huggins, and Noah Swistak. So thank you guys. All right. So thank you again for joining us at AASHE Conference at San Antonio. Thank you all. Thanks y'all, right? I hope y'all leave the conference feeling rejuvenated, energized. Travel safely home, get some of those Texas pecans before you go back, and I look forward to next year when we figure out a venue. And don't forget to donate to AASHE.